Well, Jonathan, man, it's great to have you on here. Yeah, we've known each other a long time, have not done this, but I've known of the value you provide your audience, and I hear about you so often. So I'm eager to get into this message from you. And I wanted to hit though, you've got so many pieces of your personal story that make up this because that's your teaching, it's us, who we are, what we're about that makes up our message. But you started in one of those consummate places that is so hard for people to transition from. You were a high school teacher. And I appreciate the fact that you said it was good. You enjoyed it. It was good. It wasn't bad. You just felt there was more because in my experience to be in that place and saying I'm going to jump, especially when you're married and have kids and do something else, you get often pushback. And I wonder, did you get pushback for jeopardizing the good job or encouragement to pursue something better, or a little both?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. Thankfully, my wife was very supportive. It was somewhat difficult more internally because both my parents were educators. That's what I grew up around. My dad was a high school teacher. My mom was an elementary school teacher. And I was just like, that was the thing. It's a great profession. And I married an elementary school teacher. So it was like I was living and breathing this profession of teaching and serving the next generation. But yet I found myself just 2 or 3 years in going, this just isn't exactly quite right. And I had a great relationship with the students. I enjoyed the teaching, but there were things that I didn't love. I wanted to be more creative. I wanted to do something outside of the four walls. I felt very kind of limited and constrained, and had an entrepreneurial itch, but just didn't know what that was. And so it was a journey to step out.
Well, and that's what's so curious that you did a lot of stepping out without having this specific guiding light that you felt you should focus on. And so you share that you stopped your teaching, you got a night job to pay the bills while you pursued this. But then even there at that job, and I pulled out the quote, you said you had a frustrated night and you told a coworker, I'm just ready to go fail at something. Dude, that is a curious statement because I thought about that and thought, now I kind of get it, but I don't recall that being a perspective that I had. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be multiple perspectives of what motivates you to go jump out at something. I think I often found either distaste with what I was doing or more often something that, man, there's a problem I want to go solve. And so for you to come back and say, man, this initial catalyst was, I'm just ready to go fail at something. Where does that perspective come? How did that perspective germinate for you?
It was almost like that just kind of came out. And then I realized what I just said. And what it was a call center job at night. And it was an hourly job. It kind of helped pay the bills. But most of the people that I worked around, this was a temporary thing. It was a thing that this is what you do when you're in transition. You're trying to figure out what your next thing is. And yet I was kept meeting people who I'm like, well, how long have you worked here? And it was like, I've been here 5 years and I've been here 6 years, 7 years. And it's okay if they were passionate about what they do, but they said, I never intended to be here this long. I was supposed to just be short term. And in the meanwhile, I was spending my days. The idea was the days were open for me to do something entrepreneurial. So I was reading all the books, I was taking the courses,
Yeah.
I was consuming the information. And it was like the hard reality set in that learning doesn't equal progress and doesn't necessarily line up to action. And that's when, after about 9 months after the call center job at night, that's when I said to the coworker, I'm just ready to go fail at something. It was almost like doing something and failing at it was going to be less painful than
Yeah.
just staying where I was.
Well, it's interesting. You pulled out learning because back, and we're going to get to it down where you in the book and you talk about the 8 aspects of a messenger. And I'm pulling up right here. Number 5, you said, actually, no, it was number 6. Messengers are leading learners. I, I pay a lot of attention to words, or at least the meanings we associate with words. And I looked up Merriam-Webster, says to gain knowledge or understanding of or skill in by study, instruction, or experience. And when I think about learning, I think about more than just knowledge, because I mean, we're so just filled with knowledge every day, more and more and more knowledge that often doesn't add up to anything. It's just stuff that we know. It's
Mhm.
like Trivial Pursuit. I think what's the point of knowing this stuff unless you go do it? And I think more of these days as learning as I learn it, if I actually do that. So I appreciate even in the definition, it talks about when you gain a skill that you can then go and do something with, which is what I heard you just say. In essence, you were learning things, but were you taking action on that? And as you know, that's a big leap that I think a lot of people miss.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's where you have to realize the value of doing something, even if it's done poorly. It's because I had a mentor tell me once, when in business, you have one of two outcomes. You're either trying to maximize revenue or you're trying to maximize learning. What went right, what went wrong, what I do differently, knowing what I know now that I've actually done it, how could I make this better? And that only comes from actually doing it.
So what about, and I am always, ever since Dr. Benjamin Hardy wrote his latest book, Personality Isn't Permanent, I struggle with putting too much emphasis on personality style. But if we look at just propensities, what would you say? Because as we look at this, okay, you just left this thing to go off and do something. Where would you say you fall from a personality style propensity as far as, introvert, extrovert, detail, skill, you know all the scenario.
Yeah, and I've taken all the tests. I've done
Okay.
I've done them all.
I figured.
I have done them all, and I think all of them are, a little bit of window that lets the light in.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you can always necessarily box people into certain little personality types. For example, I'm more introverted, but I would say for a long time I bucked against that because I didn't want to be introverted.
Mm.
I saw introversion as not influencing people, and it was this thing that was constraining on both sides of how can I be an introvert but yet have this high need to want to impact and influence people. And it seems like these two worlds can't exist together. And until I started getting a better understanding in my mind of what introversion really meant, it's more or less like how I power back up, right? It's more like I need the downtime to power up. And not only that, I started coming across all these speaker friends of mine who traveled and spoke and found out they're introverted. And so it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you're extroverted. That means you're on the stage speaking. You're introverted. Oh, you just kind of sit over here and kind of do something on a spreadsheet somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a, and I get into a little bit of this of the book. You do need to look into first how you're wired and how God made you. That's important because he's made us all unique. But be careful about putting yourself into boxes.
Well, and I want to get into that when you talk about defining the messenger in just a second here. But, when you talk about, well, just looking at your journey. So you go from that and you tried real estate and enough actually succeeded in flipping a house and made some money to help fund the next thing. But I appreciate what you said is what you mainly learned is that's not your gig. And it reminded me, and I have quoted this guy so many times, never talked to him. I saw him on stage somewhere eons ago, Franz Johansson. He wrote a book called The Medici Effect. And in there, what stood out to me was him saying one of the things that he saw from entrepreneurs outside of them being anything special was just that they're willing to try stuff. So again, back over here to you, that you were willing to try that. I assume your wife was okay with you trying this thing and also saying, hey, you made some money and you're not going to keep doing that. And was there a pressure to feel like, gosh, you invested some in that? Maybe you should keep doing that, or were you okay just to walk away and say, nope, that wasn't it, next?
Yeah, I think I was okay to walk away. I felt success in it, but at the same time, it was like this isn't the right fit. The excitement or energy wasn't there to get the next house or get the next two or three houses. It just wasn't the right fit for my skill set, my abilities, my knowledge. But my wife was very supportive, and that for that I'm thankful. She's always been a cheerleader. Now she comes from a family of entrepreneurs, so I will say that her dad was an entrepreneur. Her brother owns his own business. She has a brother. My brother-in-law um, owns his own business. So coming from that environment of entrepreneurial pursuits probably lended her to be willing to go on the journey.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was a great experience. But it was kind of like, how could I use this to leverage into my next thing?
Well, okay, that's a great segue into. I was going to ask about your next thing. You said you joined a startup, executive search firm for accounting professionals. Yet you had no background in accounting or finances, but obviously there was some transferable skill that you were able to offer them that they wanted. What was it?
I think it was being able to be relationship driven and genuine and connect with people, serve people who are looking for a job, be there to help them, listen to them. And so it was a permanent placement recruiting firm. So the candidates that came to us, it didn't cost them anything, but the companies would pay a fee to us when we
Yeah.
found them the ideal employee. And the challenge, though, was, but in retrospect, it was perfect. The challenge was it was a no salary job. It was 100% commission. Good commissions, but it was 100% commissions. But it did help me to learn how to little bit be an entrepreneur inside of an organization and a structure. It taught me things like having a sense of urgency and what it's like to be self-disciplined and do what you need to do to get things done and move things along. And so I learned a lot of skill sets, but it still wasn't my thing. It wasn't 100% perfect in a fit, but I learned a lot in the process.
Well, and I was going to ask that because you say you were there for 7 years. So now you've got a full time gig, 7 years. Did you look at that time as a continual learning process, or did it still, along with it, were you able to facilitate your other learning that ultimately brought you out? Did you feel like you were in a holding pattern? What did it look like during? That's a long time.
It is a long time. I would say probably about 5 years in is when I started getting an itch. Like, I don't know that I want to work a recruiting desk for the next 20 years. That was kind of my thought process. It's like, what? I've built relationships. I've earned a decent amount of money. I've done these things. I've gained great knowledge and experience, but I don't know that this is what I want to do for 20 years. It was great for 2 to 5 years, but what's the calling? And I think that was part of it too. Me from kind of growing up in a Christian environment was, what's that calling on my life? What am I supposed to do? Am I missing out on that calling? There was a little bit of that in there too. And, partially it was a struggle between, should I be in ministry? Should I do something outside? What is my calling? And so that was kind of all mixed in. But I still had this creative outlet that I wanted to pursue, but I wasn't sure what that was.
Okay, so you mentioned a biblical foundation and a calling, which that's we associate that word with more of a faith based endeavor is calling. Did you in that you mentioned ministry? Was that kind of that perspective of to have a real calling as unto God? It should be in ministry. Was that a bit of a struggle as opposed to out here in the secular business world?
It was because, growing up in the church, there was this high emphasis on, surrendering to full-time ministry, either as a speaker, as a pastor, as a missionary. And, whether it was said or not, it kind of gave the illusion of this is the people who are doing the real work, and everyone else, you do your, be salt and light, but it's really support the real work that's going on
Yeah,
without being too harsh. That was kind of the way it was interpreted. And so
sure.
here's this idea of like, am I being selfish in this? And that was the other part of it, is leaving the teaching job safe and secure, having a family, a young family, trying to do some entrepreneurial things. Was this thing me pursuing selfishly my passion, or was it a part of the calling that God had on my life? I just trying to figure it out.
So let's jump to that punchline right now, even as we're still amongst your story. How have you reconciled that today?
So for me, and this is probably something we'll get into, what it took was it took a verse or two that I came across that was really helpful to me, but then also an old outdated book. And that old outdated book was The Acres of Diamonds. And, long story short, it's basically about an African farmer who goes out, he sells his land because he wants to go get rich, finding and mining diamonds, because that was the thing. And then in pursuit of that, he ended up dying broke and despondent. And meanwhile, the person who he sold his land to accidentally came across a diamond. And when it was cultivated, the land, it found that it was the richest diamond mine in Africa. And so the point of the story, or the fable, I should say, was that sometimes we're trying to find our purpose out there when it's right under our nose all along. And I think this was the pivotal point for me, at least in my journey, is when I started realizing my purpose is not in a thing. It's not in a title. It's not in a status. It's not in a thing. My purpose is actually inside of me. It's how God made me, how he wired me, how I show up best for people. That was whatever my unique gift was. I didn't know what it was at the time, but that's when I started realizing that, wait a minute, what's changeless about me is really my purpose, because I can apply that to lots of context, lots of different scenarios, but who I am is what my purpose is. And it's been right under my nose all along. And then on top of that, Proverbs 18:16 was just a verse I kind of latched onto that said, a man's gift makes room for him and brings him before kings. And that to me was a pivotal verse that kind of told me, you know what, you need to pursue this gift that you've been given, because it's a stewardship issue. You've been given some gift, cultivate it, find out what it is, and then use that to make a difference in the world.
So for Acres of Diamonds, you mentioned that, and that one is one I've known since I was a kid. My dad loves it so much so that folks want, I mean, I'm sure you could type it in and find it a lot of places, but I knew it was here somewhere. I just found it, 48days.com. My dad, Dan Miller, his website. If you go to 48days.com/acres-of-diamonds, you can get the little story right there. It's a great one to share with your friends, family, kids, and whatnot. Now, from that, you took it, and I was intrigued by this. You did some work in this arena on just yourself, your own personal awareness, and came out with your unique gift being resourcefulness. And I just like that. That's not a norm. I think if most people think of, okay, what are personal gifts, talents, abilities? That's not, and I get that one. I get it. But I thought, I don't think I've ever thought about that one a lot, though it made me go back to a decade or so ago. And my wife said at the time, she thought that one of my primary gifts was I'm a maximizer. I like to go in and see something that's not being maximized and do that. To say resourcefulness, that's pretty great. So that's what you came to, and you took that into starting your own business, which was, again, helping give career advice to these accountants and whatnot, who, again, you did not have experience. You had never been an accountant, which I thought that was great, because it reminded me of back when I used to do some work with authors. I was really good at helping them with their own branding. I had never authored a book. To this date, I have a book deal happening right now, but this moment, there's not a book out there. But that you were able to bring that again to an arena where you were not totally experienced in that field. So it brought me back again to those transferable skills. And it seems like I hear that in your story and in this book. We all have these unique, inherent, you said gifts, but these, can we say that transferable gifts that you can apply somewhere? You're trying to help them figure out where that should go based upon their message. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but it's hard to know. We don't know unless we get outside perspective. Like you talk about your wife. I asked my wife, I asked 4 or 5 people who knew me best. Like, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the bottle. If you've ever heard of that, it's that kind of concept of like, we're too close to it. Another friend of mine said that it's difficult for us because what's ordinary to us is magic to others. And we don't see the things that we can do that other people just think, wow, I don't know how you do that. And so when I asked people, that's what just kept coming back is, Jonathan, you're resourceful. You're that guy that's like, have you thought of doing this? Or have you thought of that? And so at the time, I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, what do I do with that? Do I build how do I build a business with that? But again, it was one piece that I started putting into place, eventually turning that into a business for me.
Well, and I want folks to hear that again, that if you're looking at this, and we're going to jump right now into some of these, the specific awarenesses and understandings of ourselves, that like what you just said, to understand your gifts, your talents, that often we need other people. It reminds me of branding. I had somebody tell me that once, or I read that we all want to say with our business or ourselves, hey, this is what my brand is. We could try to influence it, though. The only person who can say what it really is the public out there, and they'll tell you what your brand actually is. So for you to say, gosh, we can sit here and go, what are my gifts? Man, I'm totally with you. I've gotten the best insight by having other people tell me what they see in me. So hopefully people have the opportunity, and people in their lives, that they can do that with. Well, so to this, the book, The Message Matters, I actually looked at, you've got a lot of 5-star reviews on Amazon. Good on you for that. And I looked at one of them, it stuck out to me. And a guy said, the book is pure encouragement and wisdom for aspiring, and he has in quotes, messengers.
Hmm.
Jonathan is an experienced mentor showing you your path to make a difference in others' lives. But he said that for aspiring messengers. And my first thought was, well, heck, isn't everybody a messenger? Is everybody? But that was before I even got to the meat of your book, which was going through, what does make up a messenger? And is that, well, let me just pose that to you.
Yeah.
Do you look at that and go, no, everybody is, or like, not everybody is supposed to be an entrepreneur. I had to learn that as I advocated that and realized that's not everybody's calling. It doesn't need to be. Thank goodness it's not. We need people doing other things. But in this aspect, is there a piece of you that feels like, no, we all have that, or it is for a certain segment of people?
Yeah, I think it is for a certain segment of people, but I also think that there's people who don't realize that there's an opportunity that exists to us today, and they're kind of undiscovered messengers. They haven't really seen that, wait a minute, this is an opportunity, because this isn't necessarily something that you pick on a college degree, right? And neither was any of this around when I was pursuing a college degree. And so, what's been neat about the book is how many people that I've talked to that I wouldn't consider like the primary audience for this book going, Jonathan, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm excited. And this is what's going to be about. Jonathan, I'm starting a blog. Jonathan, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. And I think what I'm most excited about is, there's not really been a term to define all of us. I started off as a, pure blogger. I was just blogging career advice. And that's how I kind of cut my teeth into finding that creative outlet until that turned into a business. So it was a blogger for accounting and finance professionals, and turned that into a full-time business, stepped away from the recruiting job. And then I started a second blog called Blogging Your Passion back in 2011. And then since then, it's just blown up. I mean, there's so many, and some of us call us influencers, YouTubers, bloggers, podcasters, but there's not a term to define us. And there's that term thought leaders out there. And so the way I see it is, it's, if you have a desire to like write, teach, speak, coach, and you want to make a difference in others with your story, your passion, or your message, I want people to know that they can build a real business around that. And they can do it online with all of the media tools that we have access to. And that's what I want people to know.
Well, and so in the book, and for those who will see the video, I'm holding up the cover there, but you can go find it at Amazon and of course anywhere you want to get that. But in the book, Your Message Matters, you segment it into 4 parts. Believe your message, number 1, 2, define your message, 3, market your message, and 4, live your message. And I could spend a day probably just on the first part. And I really want to give the focus there. Obviously, I'm advocating people. This is something to work out. What is your message? And then what to do with it? Because I think we have a lot of focus on figuring out what you have to offer, what you're about. But then of course we got a sea of people who are going, okay, now I got something figured out. What do I do with it? And we've seen a lot of people who never get further than that. They don't know how to, well, to your thing, they don't know how to define it. They don't know how to market it, especially. And then they don't know how, especially even how to live it. But if I look at the first part of believing in your message, to me, it was kind of the what and the why, and the rest of the book being the, okay, here's how you do it. So folks, if you want to get the how you do it, go engage with Jonathan and buy the book. Cause I really want to talk about this, the uncovering, even the believing in, you've got a message. You have, I love the reality of your life story that you start off. Here you are, and you're authoring a book. Whether this is your what, your second book?
Yes. First
Second?
traditionally published. The first one was a self-published.
Self-published, so traditionally published, which I saw it was Baker Books. I know that one from Michael Hyatt. I think his last one or more books is with Baker. And you said that you're a freshman in college. Your English professor says writing is not your thing. Don't become a writer. Boom. There you go. You just been delivered the verdict, and there it sits. Now, later on, then you have your wife say, well, you know what? Let me stop there.
Yeah.
There's your professor. Now, he didn't say that because he was a jerk. I don't expect, hopefully, maybe he was, but there's probably some context, some realistic context. So there you are, you receive this. This is a guy that's seen your writing. You're in the class. What do you think the context was for him to have that perspective?
You know, that's a good question. It was a creative writing class. It was about writing short stories. And it was the one class in college that was like, I'm actually enjoying it. Like, I'm not just trying to do the paper at the last minute, turn it in, but I found myself like being energized about it and excited about it. And then to like get that, you know, from who you consider to be an expert, to get that kind of negative thing was, well, maybe just because I'm passionate about it, I'm not skilled in it, I need to find something else. And so it was like, I set writing on the shelf for several years until my wife started speaking into me what she believed to be true about me that I didn't believe.
Well, and that was my next thing. So she says, you're going to write a book someday. And you said that at that time that she said that, you had no audience, no experience, no manuscript, no book idea. So again, I'm going to ask, so what was the context that she would say? She didn't say, hey, I think you're going to be a professional athlete. Hey, I think you're going to be a celebrity TV star. She said, I think you're going to write a book. Why?
Yeah. And this is back when I was teaching. So it was like, I'm a high school teacher. I fell in love with books in college. I started reading, you know, I think Billy Graham was one of the first books, then Max Lucado. Then I came across, came across the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then I started, Zig Ziglar books started coming in, and I started reading, you know, Zig Ziglar. Your dad's book, 48 Days to Work You Love, was extremely instrumental. And so she saw me like consuming books just because I just love to consume these books. And she said, you know what? She goes, every time I talk to you and you're sharing with me the stuff that you're learning, she said, you're going to write a book one day. And I just remember like, you know, and she wasn't even in the context. We didn't even attend the same college. So she knew nothing of the story of me having aspirations to write and having them snuffed. That was just a word she said. And I just remember that planted a seed in there. And it was many years before the opportunity came. But it's amazing. I think the lesson for me is don't let any one person's words be an anchor to your soul and carry too much weight, but also surround yourself with what I call message carriers, you know, people who are there to help you, support you, encourage you, and help carry your message.
Well, we had in the past, gosh, I don't know, 4 months or so, I had Andy Andrews on the show, and he talked about his first book, Traveler's Gift, that he wrote. And
Great book.
Great book that got rejected. I can't remember, like 50 times, let's say, something stupid.
Yeah.
Because on the show, he said, you know, what's so interesting to him is it's not that the publishers were wrong. They were really, really wrong. Obviously, he sold millions of those books. And it wasn't that long later, I had Charles Martin on the show, and his first book, I think his was like 81 times got rejected. And now that book alone, of course, he's sold millions of other books, but that book alone is sold like crazy. And you're like, oh, how on earth could somebody be so wrong? Because we also I mean, there are some times, and I know you've seen this, Jonathan, and I ask this question authentically because I just don't know what to do with it sometimes, to say, when do we hear feedback? Because we can't all do anything and everything. Ziglar talks about that. He tries to marry that because he often gets lumped into that. Oh, here's one of those guys that says you can just do anything. He says, no, no, that's not true. Shaquille O'Neal is never going to have enough positive thinking to be a great jockey.
Yeah.
It's physically not going to work, which is interesting because we've got basketball players, who are 5 foot tall that have actually played in the NBA that can overcome it. But there are some times to say, you know what, I think you're going after something and it doesn't seem suited to you. So just to have this unchecked confidence, you want to
Mm-hmm.
question it. And yet over here, you've got so many stories like you and me talking about, these great authors who were rejected so many times, where we need to not give it so much gravity. But we see that. I mean, you're a father, we see kids sometimes and you want to tell them you can do anything, but I've got some kids and I've seen them aspire to some directions. And I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure that that's the best fit for you. And I guess that's part of where you have them work through that in your book. I mean, what are some, not barriers, some filters to say, because I've looked at that and said, okay, do you really want that? And sometimes I found that even though somebody's saying they want to, they don't really. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why it's not a good fit. They're going that way because they think that there's some pressure or something there, and it doesn't really fit their giftings and skills at all.
And that's where that takes the ability. You have to have people in your life who, not just family members, but friends. I have a couple who speak that kind of truth to me, and they have that permission to speak it. They know me well. And that's where that relationship part does come into play. But people who oftentimes, like the college professor, who there was no relationship, didn't really know me that well, just kind of saying thing off, for whatever reason, bad day, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's different than someone who you consider to be on your team, who you believe's for you, who's also kind of looking out for you. However, I still have a tendency to want to question that and go find it out for myself. Just like, for example, a book I absolutely loved years ago was from Bruce Wilkinson, The Dream Giver. It's just a phenomenal book. And he talks about how Ordinary, who's the character in his book, wanted to go do his big dream. And yet when he got to the edge of to step out into his big dream, to cross the bridge, there were border bullies. And what he was surprised at was that the border bullies were actually people he knew.
Mm.
So that is also, I say that on one hand. On the other hand, I say you still sometimes may have to just take a step and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah. Well, so in filtering this out, you've got, kind of 4 points you begin with. What is your unique gift? And figuring that out. You've got to go do the work to become aware, to figure out what your unique gift is. And now, as you said a couple of times now, one of the best places to do is to go to the people who know you, but, cash that with who know you and are for you. Could we say that?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people who know people who are not for them. Don't go to them. So the ones that are, so what is your unique gift now? But right there, you got 4 points. That's number one. But now we're still back. And I know you hit on this book, but you know that you talk to a lot of people who may give lip service and nod their heads to, that we all have a unique gift. Yeah. But they just don't really believe it. They just don't really believe it. Or they may think I may have a little bit, but it's nothing special. Jonathan, you've obviously got something special, but I think it's the rubber hits the road when we talk about this in the personal development and self-help world, and people nod their heads. But when I see how they then go about their lives, they don't really believe it.
Yeah.
And you've got to end up spending a lot of your time just talking to that.
Yeah. So I'll give you 2 quick examples.
Please.
So the first time, a couple years ago, I was selling at the time my flagship course, something I only opened twice a year. And at the time it was called Blogging Your Passion University, for people who wanted to build a business with a blog. And on the last day I said, I'm going to be in the live chat, come chat with me. And I had like 5 or 6 chat windows open. I'm handling all these conversations. And it was literally 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours that day on the computer, having conversation after conversation. And guess what? None of the conversation was about Jonathan asking me about the particulars. What's the features of the course? What do you teach? What this or that? 100% of it was on they doubted themselves.
Yeah.
And that's when I walked away that day and I realized, wait a minute, people don't doubt my product, they doubt themselves.
Hmm.
And that was a huge beginning for me. And then when I signed the book contract, I did a survey to my list and said, hey, I'm going to be writing a book about how to, take your message. I didn't even really I kind of had the title, but we're still figuring out the title. And I said, tell me what's stopping you from marketing your message? That was kind of the term I used. What's stopping you from like getting your message out there to the world? Number one thing was believing in their message, like believing they actually had a message to share. And that's when I actually rewrote my outline and included that first part about believing you have a message. And that's so very important.
So maybe that's step one, is you've got to believe. If you don't believe it, maybe you you can't go past, you can't go further if you don't start there.
Yeah.
Is believing that you do have one. If you do, then discovering that. And then your next point, though, your number two here is, who do you want to help? And again, I like the example that you've given so far. You, in that first business endeavor of being a consultant to accountants, even
Mhm.
though that wasn't an area, you had not been an accountant, but you did have experience in that business. So you went forth and did that. I mean, that just to me comes back to the branding aspect of, the more you niche down, the better you are. So you're doing, business counsel to accountants, and then you go and you're helping bloggers specifically. You had these niches. So who do you want to help? Because as you know, it's so tempting for so many people, especially if they're in the, personal development, self-help industry, to say, who do I want to help? Well, everybody.
Yeah.
And well, hit on that, because I'm sure you
Yeah.
get that a lot, and you also know it doesn't get very far.
Yeah, 100%. And you might be interested in the genesis of this, Kevin, because I was just thinking about this morning. So we go back a ways. In fact, I was a part of your coaching program and group, and I remember you having an open coaching call. And in the beginning, I was going to start my website, my blog, being a career and life coach. And it was going to be for everybody. Like, I just want to help everybody, right? I don't want to narrow it down. Doesn't that make it harder to build an audience if you only help a certain small segment of people? That was my thinking, but it was completely the opposite. And it was actually you on the call, and you probably don't remember this at all, but I clearly remember this morning, that you said, well, if you've got a background in finance and accounting, you need to be niching down and just helping those people. And so that day was when I went and originally bought the CPAcareercoach.com website
Hmm.
and the domain, and did that for several years before, rebranding it on my journey. But I never forgot that lesson, because had I not niched down, I would have been this watered down version of trying to help everybody. And it's much easier to be a big fish in a small pond. And that was the lesson I learned.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful to hear the testimony. I know in Free Agent Academy, we had Jimmy Gibson, who's a branding expert. And for lack of knowing who else to attribute it to, I'm going to say it's him. I mean, I grew up with with my dad, with a lot of people in counsel, but that was drilled into me of niching down and the value of that. And when I first started doing business consulting, I did it specifically for authors, even though I had not authored a book, but that's where I had worked with my dad, and I had seen his and seen the value of that. And thank goodness for counsel. Well, again, I love that. Who do you want to help? And I think it was Jimmy back then who made you at the events pick that avatar. No, I want to, what's these kind of, no, who's the person?
Hmm.
Are they black, white, male, female, short, tall? I mean, he would make you get as specific. He said, so you speak to that specific person and get that niche down. So I just, again, I like this. What's your unique gift? Who do you want to help with it? And then that beautiful question, what problem will you solve? And it's such a brilliant question. And yet I still will sometimes embark on a business endeavor, a direction, a category, something we're doing, and don't do a good job clarifying that. I'm just going down thinking about, oh, we're going to help people, but coming back to what, and if we don't lead with that, as you know, I think we're in a more acute time than ever. If we don't lead with that, we can't, it's harder to hook people than harder than ever. And
Yeah.
that's still the leading aspect. What problem will you solve? And when you cite that question, is that generally a struggle for folks to figure out, or are they usually cognizant of it?
I think it provides clarity to them, because they're like, oh, okay, I've got to pick a problem. But I also, the way that I like to describe it, because in that I also talk about this word passion, and the passion's this big misunderstood word. And so
Yeah.
and again, just for clarity's sake, in the book, defining your message comes down to purpose, people, and passion. Purpose, what is your unique gift? People, who do you want to serve? And passion, what problem are you going to help solve? And the way that I like to describe it is, what problem are you passionate about solving for the next 2 to 5 years? Because what that does is kind of relieves that passion doesn't equal pressure, and that I got to do this, I got to find that one and only passion out there that I'm going to do for the next 30 years.
Yeah.
Because we're evolving, our passions change. And that's
Yes.
one of the things I
Absolutely.
talked about in the book that I think was so helpful for me when I realized this, is you're not a wandering child, because your passions morph and your passions change. Because what you find certainty in is your purpose, how you show up. And so it's okay for your passions will change, but your purpose remains. And I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what I'll be doing 15, 20 years from now. But I do know one thing: I can show up as a resourceful teacher, because that's what I've discovered as how I show up best for people. And that can be applied in so many different contexts. And so, what problem are you passionate about solving for the next 2 to 5 years? Relieves the pressure, helps you to get focused on serving a specific audience.
You just mentioned it, and I forgot to hit on it earlier in that aspect of understanding yourself. You wrote in the book, and I think you just mentioned it right there. It's what brought me back to it, is what is changeless about you. And I like that your passions may change, but your purpose probably isn't. And I have become over the years more and more and more and more continually aware of what doesn't change. And no matter where you put me in, if you're going to put me in a good spot, where if I'm going to exist in a good spot, I'm going to do the same things. And being an entrepreneur, I get to do that. So no matter as I've done so many things, even over the past 5 years I have, and I've got a handful of things that work. I'm doing the same things. I know where my
Yeah.
giftings, and I've figured out how to keep myself more and more just in the lanes that I do well. So yeah, my purpose has continued to stay the same, even though what's the passion that I am assigning it to? Oh my goodness, there's multiples. I'm sure you could give some category overall to some of the genres, but that seems so freeing and takes away some of the fear of, I'm going to step out and I better nail it.
Yeah.
And again, that's so much your story that you're helping people, walk through in their own lives.
Yeah, and it's sometimes it's easier to see it backwards than forwards, So, but looking
Definitely.
backwards, it's like I can see where I constantly, in every scenario, in job or position, I was trying to express my uniqueness, my giftedness. Put me in a job, and I'm going to gravitate toward that thing. And it's true if you have employees. It's true if you're an entrepreneur. I think it's true for all of us, because that's how we're naturally wired. We want to move towards that thing that we naturally do well.
Well, I want people to hear, because I'm going to come back on the messenger aspect, and I want to drill in there a little bit more. But the second part of your book, defining your message, 3 things you need to nail down to ignite your message in your business, and you just named them: purpose, what's your unique gift; people, who do you want to serve; and then 3, passion, what problem do you want to solve. The third part of yours is marketing it, which as you know, a lot of people just want to jump there, and
Hmm.
I think it's generally putting the cart before the horse. Now, once you've figured all this out that we're talking about, there's a lot of people die right there. And I love how you structure that: create, capture, compile, and connect. And folks, again, this is not just a message, it's something you need to learn, study, and work through. And the book is a great starting point. And then I know they can engage with you further. Now, with that said, and they can look forward to that, I want to dig into again more of the message. And you are a messenger. You pulled it out into 8 areas that were just really interesting to me. And I want to walk through those if we can.
Yeah.
Um, you said messengers are creatively driven. There are so many people that don't think they're creative, but right in the definition of that, one of the first things you said are they are wired to create. And I don't know that people, I mean, obviously the word is exist, create creativity, but we think of creativity as this artistic flair of a human. But over here on create, I think we have, I know a lot of people that say, no, I create things. I see a problem and I want to go help fix that, create something. And you would say that's being creative, but I don't think we extrapolate that. But to create, when you see that thing that you're passionate about, or I've had some guests lately that said that thing that breaks your heart. I've always thought about that thing that burdens me and I want to create. It was Tom Ziglar who said 80% of people are more problem focused, solving a problem, than they are goal focused. So if you see a problem, you want to do that. I hear you saying that's being creative. And that you have that as the number one hallmark of being a
Yeah.
messenger. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yep. Messengers are wired to create because they want to help. They want to help. They want to serve in any way, in any capacity. Whatever that outlet is, they just feel this desire to want to share. And again, we get to this a little bit more. We didn't really talk about it much, but we talk about kind of the different influencer voices that are out there: the writer, teacher, speaker, coach, and there's an assessment in there to help you with that, but kind of help you know, where do I lean into this desire to create. But yeah, 100%. Like, we're wired to create. If you're a messenger, again, you don't have to check the boxes on all 8 of these. It's funny, my own daughter, she's 18, she just said, Dad, I just checked off like all 8. I must be your daughter. And I laughed. And I'm like, well, she's reading the book. I think that's awesome. She's studying in college for communications, but she's reading the book and trying to figure it out. My wife, she checked off 5 out of the 8. So it's not like a scorecard necessarily, but it is, I think it helps to define. And it's one of the things I wanted to have in the book, was to help people understand, maybe this helps describe who you are. You just haven't realized it yet.
Well, and I like that. That was actually going to be one of my questions is, do you feel like, somebody needs to somewhat have to be able to check off the majority or just some? So I'm grateful you said that, because your second one here is messengers are mission oriented, serving a cause. They've got a problem to solve. And I have seen a lot of people find that thing that they want to address, that thing they want to solve. And you find the really acute stories of somebody who, recently we were talking about a guy who testified to one of the questions that we had posted about a show. And I think his dad died. They didn't have life insurance, annihilated the family. I mean, just devastated them. And so today he sells life insurance. Why? He has a very strong cause, a very strong mission. And I've seen people, and I'm sure you have too, who find that thing that they want to address, that purpose, that passion, that thing that they're excited about or burdened by, whatever. And that's so strong that it can overcompensate for the fact that they may not have a whole lot of the other things that you would attribute to a messenger here. Is that one that you do see can be that we can have strengths or have some of these so strong that we only need 1 or 2, even if we're lacking in the rest?
Yes. In fact, that's why I put it in the book. Hey, listen, this is not a checklist. You don't have to say, yes to all 8 of these. But if some of these resonate with you, put a check mark by it. Let's go on this journey. And that's what I love about the book, and the feedback that I've gotten so far is this book is not just a marketing book. It's part 1 is a self-development journey. And then the second part's the more practical marketing principles that we can use. But this first part is about just kind of uncovering and maybe even stripping away some of what we thought was maybe the right journey ahead. We get this, go get that safe and secure job. And there's that, just go find that thing and just do that thing. And at the same time, there's a whole world out there that people don't know about. They just think that, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But even right now, we see people that are are being pushed out of what their comfort zones were. And now they're kind of, there's this awakening of, what do I want my life to really be about? What do I want to do? And I think that's where that mission part can come into play.
Man, totally agree. I do, it's not to give more value to any one of these eight. Number three here, though, you have messengers or transformation makers. And my paraphrasing of that was they're doing their work. They're in their job, their vocation, their career. And a primary driver is making a difference, accomplishing something more than just earning a dollar. And to some degree, early on when we were talking, you mentioned the labels that we get: messenger, influencer, thought leader. And it sticks out to me because in the podcast world, the biggest podcasts out there are entertainment. Now, I would also put them as influencers. Joe Rogan, whether he desires to or not, is an influencer. He thinks of himself as a comedian. And I appreciate the fact that he says, I don't know why you guys listen to me. And I appreciate that. But whether he wants to or not, he is a massive influencer. Now, is he a thought leader as far as a positive, let's help humanity? Again, not against him. And I'm not a big listener of him, but I don't get that that's his primary focal point, that he's happy to make $100 million from Spotify because they want to promote his show. That's a lot of entertainment. So back to here, number three, that I see most of the people who are having an impact in other people's lives are the ones where above making a dollar or equal to however you want to give it, they really want to do something with their work. They want to have it matter. Does that line out to you?
Yeah. And what's interesting about some of this is out of that time I spent as an executive recruiter, every week I would interview 8 to 10 people. They would come into the office. I'd sit down with them, hearing about, what is their dream job, their ideal job? Why are they looking to make a switch? What is it that they want? And I would just hear over and over again from people going, well, I just kind of do my thing and I pass it along. And then I never know if it made any kind of impact. I just don't know if I'm making a difference. And so I heard that contribution, transformation, desire from people. And yeah, it's not saying that if you work in a traditional environment that you're not making a difference. Of course you are, but in certain positions, in certain situations, you can really connect that. And I think as a messenger, you're directly connected to the people you're helping, and you can see the difference and feel the difference in the transformation that's happening, which is incredibly encouraging beyond just making a dollar.
Man, you saying that the contribution and people often, especially in a big corporate environment, are separated from the end product and service and the person who gets the benefit from that. They're so far. And man, on that, if that's of interest to people, one of the books that has been a big, really unpacked that well and how that affects us. It's by Matthew Crawford. And he wrote a book called Shop Class as Soulcraft. I talk about him so much. I've never tried to have him on a show, never pursued him, but man, that one, he does a great job of just saying, here's the downfall, the fallout, I should say, of being separated from, that making a difference with your work. Well, your fourth one here, messengers are challenge seekers. And you talk about they're ones who are readily willing to go after that undiscovered path and not the beaten trail. But the thing I like that you said in there is you said, while they may sometimes doubt their abilities, they still know that undiscovered path is more rewarding than the beaten down. That doubt, because again, looking at even entrepreneurship and us talking about the story of you and leaving that you did that amongst doubt. And I think we get this errant perspective that to go out there and conquer the world, we have to be without doubt. It reminds me of the no fear t-shirts and ball caps. I thought, man, somebody said, I don't know who it was, it said, if you don't have fear, you've got a mental illness. So for you to pull that out and to say, oh, doubts, is that fair to say? Doubt, you should have doubt. Who doesn't have doubt?
Yeah. And in fact, I'll tell you this, in the middle of writing the book, here's what my inner critic told me: Jonathan, you're not a good enough writer for such a great title. This should be somebody else's story. somebody else has a more powerful background and story that would fit better to this. Someone has better experience than you. And like I had to push against that. And so the guy who wrote Your Message Matters had to remind himself every day that his message mattered. But in the book, I talk about a quote that's been so powerful to me, and it's by Susie Kasem, who said that doubt kills more dreams than
Yeah.
failure ever
I
will.
read that. That was great. Yeah.
And, here's the thing. Most of us don't see doubt as the dream killer. We see failure. Oh, I don't want to fail. I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to fail. But not once do you hear people say, well, if I doubt something means I should hold back, right? That's our natural thing. If I doubt something, maybe I shouldn't do it. No, if doubt is the dream killer, that means when we feel doubt, it's kind of like the engine light coming on in the car, and it's
Yeah.
saying you need to step forward anyways. And I've had to learn that along the way, that doubt thing doesn't ever totally go away, but don't let it be the dream killer.
Man, you saying that, I sometimes, Jonathan, I mean, I know the imposter syndrome is always something
Mhm.
that I think of, and I just know it exists. It exists in me. I don't know that I can get rid of it. At this point, I'm not even trying to. I just try to, as you said, recognize it. I love that you saying the guy who wrote Your Message Matters. You've got to separate that. Sometimes, to get on a spiritual side, I think, I actually do believe there's an enemy trying to keep me from it. And sometimes I'll look at something, like doing a show, or being nervous about something or doubting it, to go, look, you've got 48 million downloads. There's 450,000 downloads per month. Look at the latest reviews. I have no reason to doubt myself, but I am. And sometimes I'll just sit there and think, I'm going to pawn it off as enemy trying to pull me down, and just go ahead anyways, because it makes no sense whatsoever. And I like what you said. Sometimes we just have to separate it. That's why I like being aware of it. Let's get it out on the table and go, okay, I see you. I'm not going to give you power today in my life, but I see it's better than not being aware at all and wondering what the heck is going on.
Yeah, and in the book I talk about, because this was a revelation for me and a real help, was present courage and the power of present courage. And this first came to light. I wanted to do an in-person event. Finally, decided to do it. I was nervous. Are people going to buy a ticket? Come spend 2 days with me. And this was back in 2019. We had about, I think, 80 people who were coming, flew in from across the country. The night before in the hotel room, I said, you know what? I'm going to go find my very first YouTube video back when I was doing career coaching and play it for them to show them like how terrible I was. And it'll be an encouragement to them.
Yeah.
And so I searched for it. And when I looked at it, this was the night before the event, I found that it was exactly 10 years to the day
Wow.
that I published my first YouTube video. So the event was like June 19th, 2019. And I published my first video June 19th, 2009. And I remember sitting back and going, what if I could hop in the DeLorean, like Back to the Future, and go to that person who's nervous about publishing this YouTube video, a little bit unsure, not really confident in their abilities and in their skills. If I could tap on my younger self on the shoulder, and I would say to that person, hey, you don't know this right now, but there's a whole room of people in the future, 10 years
Wow.
from today, that are waiting for you. And their future help depends on your present courage right now, that you've got to publish this. It's not perfect. No, but we've got to do this thing. Everybody starts in obscurity. We all creatives often start in obscurity, and we learn along the way. But that's what I want people to think about, is it takes a moment of present courage to buy the domain name, publish the book, start the podcast, do the blog. But there are people in the future that their future help depends on your present courage right now.
We own the movie. It's Matt Damon. We bought a zoo. And
Yeah,
in that, he talks about 20 seconds of insane courage. Uh, I love it. So it's vernacular we use in our families, 20 seconds of insane
love
courage.
it.
Um, 5, messengers are gift cultivators. And you talk about growing personal gifts and skills and talents. We just had show 837. John Bevere was on here, and his book is X, Multiply Your God Given Potential. But he talks in, we talked in that about that. You don't just, back to where you start off with people finding out what your gift is. You don't find that and go, oh, that's my gift, let's go offer it to the world. You actually have to cultivate that. So I appreciate that. The messengers you see. So if I extrapolated it and said, the people who are succeeding in this are the ones who are finding their gifts, but then they are doing the work to grow and refine that, which, I mean, I think most people have experienced somebody who you realize, man, they've got an amazing gift that the world will never see because they can't, either they're not doing the work to grow it or confine it, or they can't get out of their own way enough. That's the consummate artist story. Somebody who can't get their work together. How many awesome musical bands or musicians will we never see because they can't get themselves in order personally enough to get on stage and actually deliver something? And that's what I hear you saying, and a great appreciation for saying, hey, it's not in essence enough to know that gift or discover it. Now you have to grow and cultivate it.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to start cultivating it and develop it into a skill. And like we talked about earlier, it's you learn by doing. And after you do it, you get better at it.
Yeah. Well, the sixth one here we talked about, I pulled that out earlier when you talked about learning. You said messengers are leading learners. And you said that before, that learning is in essence, it's taking action, not just, is that fair to separate it out? Not just getting the knowledge, but actually then doing something with it. It was, goodness, I'm going to, what's the guy's name? I had him on the show. The guy's been everywhere lately. I just went blank, but he's the one that said, we have these lessons in life from something we probably made a mistake in, we failed at, whatever, and we learned a lesson. We went forward. Now, if you're repeating that same event over and over and over, you haven't learned the lesson yet. And
Hmm.
I appreciate him saying that. And with this, that, we hear that, what is it? Leaders or readers. We hear that kind of stuff
Yeah.
a lot, but man, you can also just read and intake so much stuff and never do anything with it. So yeah, I appreciate you. And that's, I think, getting a little deeper on what learning really is.
Yeah. And I think your dad's been a great example of that for me. Is
Yeah.
I've sat and watched him invest in himself. Like he
Oh my
didn't know how to
gosh.
do
Yeah.
webinars, and he invested in himself. How do I do webinars? And when I learned that from him, I started saying, you know what, I've got to invest in those. I was just a high school teacher. I didn't know how to do online marketing. I didn't know how to do a
Yeah.
podcast, webinars, any of this stuff. But it was like, what's the next step that I need to do? And then go learn it. It's kind of that, it's taking a manufacturing principle just in time, but making it just in time learning.
Yeah.
What is the thing that you need to do next? Find a mentor, learn how to do it, invest in yourself, and then go produce a result.
Yeah. Well, and even in that, you mentioned my dad. I appreciate that because I saw him as a guy who had a lot of success, and it hit me at one point, almost an aspect of humility to still say, I still have things to learn. And the fact that he still is going to the conferences, he's
Yeah.
still sitting at the feet. He's never arrived to where he doesn't need to learn anything. And honestly, it stuck out to me because I went through a point in my life of becoming aware of how prideful I was, and I was not coachable. There's a long story there, but this show's not about me. Let's go back to you.
And let
You
me
said,
just say that. Let me
yeah,
say this real quick.
please.
I saw your dad at the last in person podcast movement conference,
Yeah.
sitting there taking notes, and I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
Dan Miller's sitting here learning.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just an incredible encouragement to me.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Well, seventh one here, messengers are freedom lovers is how you titled that. And in that, though, what I pulled out was, and I think you said that, is they question the status quo. And in my mind, I thought they don't just accept the norm, which is a hot point for me because my experience, if I just say the industry that we're in, a personal development, business development, self-help, I have continued to grow to feel like one of the biggest challenges, struggles that people face is just that, is the status quo. And I think I have not given it enough weight, enough gravity in how hard it is to go do something different, to question the norm and do something. Because when you get in that world, as I think you and I more so are, on one hand, I love it. I love the freedom. And I'm also aware sometimes it's tiring.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just, I don't want to go to the Thanksgiving meal with everybody, which this year nobody is, I guess, but I don't want to go there and go, no, we don't eat that. And we don't eat that. And we brought our goofy food over here. I mean, it's not fun. It's a pain in the butt, but but I do love the freedom. About the same time I go, oh, I'm kind of tired of it. The next moment, I don't want anybody else choosing my directions and decisions for me, but I do love the freedom and questioning the status quo. I think, again, you've got to be able to do that. I just realize that sometimes it's just so difficult for people. I want to commiserate with it. It can get tiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely can. And but at the same time, that's why you got to go back to your why. And in fact, in the book,
Yeah.
I talked about the Messenger Manifesto, which was something I wrote because I was kind of getting weary in what I was doing. And like you get lost in the stuff, right? In building the business. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so I wrote this manifesto to read each day
Yeah.
to help me understand and remember my why.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's important.
Which you do, and I'll pull that out. You put that in the book. You end each chapter with kind of a little working through, and you have the manifesto in there, and you have
Yeah.
some really great things to work through. Well, the last one here you have, and again, I want to go back to what you started this off with, is saying this does not mean, to be a messenger that you have to check mark every single box. So this
Mm-hmm.
isn't everybody, but statistically, if you look over, and I know you pulled these out, you said messengers are future focused. They look ahead. They have a vision. And you said earlier that there's some, when you have somebody, especially in a vocation, you guys, I just do what I do, and I don't really know anything beyond that. That the traditional, not that this is a diss on employment out there,
Right.
but that is by proxy kind of what employment does. It says, here's where you go. This is your cog. This is what you do. And it's not a training ground for looking ahead. So would you say that in this endeavor, that may be an area, kind of an unused muscle that people may not have, that they're going to have to revive or generate for the
Yeah.
first time?
It could be. There's some of us that we are, we're wired more to be kind of
Yeah.
in a traditional setting. But here's what I want people to know, that if you're that person who's always future focused and you never quite feel settled and you feel like your resume is all over the place, you feel like, people are judging you, you feel like you can't find your thing in the world, I want you to know it's okay, that maybe, just maybe, you might be defined as a messenger and you've got something that's against the status quo, and it's okay, you're not alone. There's lots of people who feel this way.
Hmm.
And here's how, the book hopefully helps you to define it and put your creative energy in a direction. So that's how I would define
That's
it.
great. That's great. Well, here's a statement that you made. I don't know where it was in the book, but I thought, what a great anchor, because it's just so all encompassing. I'm just going to hand it to you and let you define it, unpack it a little bit. The big question of, what am I ultimately trying to accomplish with my work? Tell us about it.
Yes. So this was when way back in the, I just started a blog. I'm kind of liking it, but I still had the day job, and, life was busy. The kids were younger. There were little league games. There's church responsibilities. There's just, life was busy. And finally, one day I was just kind of sitting there, and I went over to my whiteboard at my home office and I wrote down, what am I ultimately trying to accomplish with my
Yeah.
work? Like, what is it? And I started writing down a few ideas, and, I came up with an acronym called LIFE. Now, this was for me, but that was the moment where it became an opportunity filter for me, where I could say no to things, yes to things, and it helped me to stay on the path of the life that I wanted to build. And I learned this also from 48 Days to Work You Love. Your dad's got a diagram in the book that shows, most people has work in the center and then everything's out on the fringes. But what if you could turn it around and put life at the center, and everything helps support your life? That was kind of another concept for me, but it was an acronym for me. That L stood for lifestyle. So I wanted to have the freedom to work when and where and how I wanted, and nobody was telling me I had to work till 5 p.m. every day. And the I was impact. So I wanted to do things. I wanted to work on things that were making a difference in the lives of others that I could see. F for me was financial freedom. So I wasn't tied to a salary or, hopefully the 2% living increase bump every year. I was actually had the ability to build that wealth. And then E was effort. And part of that again was me as somebody who's real curious about self-development, is I wanted to push the boundaries on my skill sets. And could I write a book? Could I learn to speak on stage? Could I do these things? And so as opportunities came my way, I was better able to say no or yes, because I had my acronym life as an opportunity filter for me.
Well, the book overall, Jonathan, I'm a fan of it. That's why you're on the show, because to me, I think we hear that message so often that, oh, you have a message, but that the the sequential aspect of, and again, this is my paraphrasing, but it's what stuck out to me, of helping people believe it. And that's where we've spent a lot of the time here, believing and conceptualizing. Though then, and I know a lot of people, if they do get to that point, they don't know what to do about it. And to some degree, that's where you spent a lot of your time and expertise, is helping people go sell that, go market it. I mean, you're a
Yeah.
marketer, but I see that's what sells. That's what people want to go buy. I'll just come help me sell it. And yet I see so many people who really have not solidified over here, believing and really, again, I say conceptualizing, but you said, defining it. And that's what enamored me with that. That's what I want to refer people to. Come here and solidify this thing. And then you'll also help them go figure out how to market that as well. So that's what people can look forward to in the book and in connecting with you, man. I'm grateful to see this come out. Grateful that you did what it took to bring it out. I don't think it's ever been more needed. So, man, thank you. Thanks for bringing it to us, and thanks for taking the time to bring it to me and this show.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for having me and just sharing a little bit of my story and a little bit about the book.
Absolutely.